24시간 불이 꺼지지 않는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
한국에 오면 먹어야죠.
먹어도 끝이 없는 나라. 감당할 수 있겠니?
Coming up on Arirang News. Some medical professors at South Korea's major hospitals started closing their offices today as part of their weekly day off from work. Amid this, the deadline has closed for medical schools to submit the size of their admissions increases for next year. President Yoon hosts his Angolan counterpart, João Lourenço, during which they agreed to expand economic cooperation between the two countries, including trade, shipbuilding, and energy. Samsung Electronics is expected to log an earnings surprise in the first quarter, with its operating profits surging more than 930% compared to a year earlier. Its chip sector turned black for the first time in 5 quarters. Good evening. It's 9 p.m. here in Seoul. Thank you for joining us on Arirang News. We start with the ongoing standoff between the government and the doctors over the medical school admissions hike. Medical professors at all of South Korea's so-called Big Five hospitals have decided to take a weekly day off from work, and some halted their services today as part of it. Amid this, the deadline has closed for medical schools to submit the size of their admissions increases for next year, with the total rise expected to be more than 1,500. Yoon has the latest.
Medical professors at Severance and Seoul National University hospitals took a day off from work on Tuesday, following a decision by all such professors to reduce their weekly working hours. According to local media, however, there were no signs of the anticipated chaos, as overall participation was not significant at either hospital. An official at Seoul National said the action did not significantly interfere with patient care because it was not a collective action, but rather participation by professors on an individual basis. A Severance hospital official noted that professors there needed to adjust their schedules with patients directly, and so many continued to work as usual. The remainder of the so-called Big Five hospitals will also see professors taking 1 day a week off, pausing surgeries and outpatient treatment. But emergency and intensive care treatment will continue for people and other inpatients. Professors at Asan Medical Center and the Catholic University of Korea's Seoul St. Mary's Hospital will take Fridays off, while those at Samsung Medical Center will take days off based on their work schedule. Prolonged fatigue among medical professors covering for thousands of trainee doctors who left their positions in late February could see some take more than 1 day off. The doctors are protesting the government's plan to expand the medical school admissions quota. The government has deployed public health and military doctors to fill the void left by medical professors and junior doctors. Meanwhile, the health authorities, who have been checking on operations at hospitals to decide on whether to deploy more people on Tuesday, have not given any updates. This is because no hospitals have completely halted their medical services. While assuring no major gaps in medical services, the government is standing firm, urging trainee doctors to return to work and professors to remain with their patients, adding the government is always open to talks. Meanwhile, the deadline for medical schools to submit the number of students they will accept next year also falls on Tuesday. The total expanded number is expected to be around 1,500 to 1,700 students, as most private universities are expected to fully accept the government's quota expansion plan, while national universities are leaning toward a 50% increase. With the expansion of medical school places close to the government's target of 2,000 students, attention is turning to how the professors, trainee doctors, and existing students will respond. The final number will be sent to the Korean Council for University Education. Yoon, Arirang News.
Moving on. Petroleum, diamonds, cobalt, and a young, productive population. These are some key words that describe the naturally gifted country of Angola. Earlier today, President Yoon held a summit with Angolan President João Lourenço at his office, during which they agreed to expand economic cooperation. This comes ahead of South Korea's summit with African countries in June. Our correspondent Kim Do-yeon has the details.
South Korea is seeking closer ties with Angola, a nation rich in natural resources and with a young, productive population. President Yoon hosted a summit on Tuesday with Angolan President João Lourenço at Yongsan Presidential Office. This is the first time in 23 years for an Angolan president to meet a South Korean president in Seoul.
앙골라는 천연 자원이 풍부하고 젊은 인구의 비중이 높습니다. 한국은 우수한 기술력과 경제 발전 경험을 보유하고 있습니다. 오늘 정상회담에서 양국의 강점을 바탕으로 상호 협력을 더욱 확대해 나가는 방안을 깊이 있게 논의하길 기대합니다.
The two nations signed 4 MOUs following the summit. Those include a memorandum of understanding on creating a trade and investment promotion framework between the two nations' trade ministries. Other government agencies also agreed to work together. This is on top of the investment MOU signed on Monday by the two countries' trade promotion agencies, KOTRA and APEX. President Lourenço explained that South Korea is a country to learn from.
There could be cooperation between agencies and surely in the private sector. South Korea has experience of extensive development in a short period, so I'm looking forward to sharing and learning in this aspect together.
Angola's natural resources include oil and gas, diamonds, cobalt, and nickel, all essential for South Korea's industries. As a result, the two already have been enjoying economic exchanges, including Korean companies participating in the construction of major facilities in Angola and cooperating in Angola's renewable energy projects. This comes as both countries seek to expand their influence in each other's geopolitical regions. In June, South Korea is set to host the first ever Korea-Africa summit, which the Angolan president acknowledged during the meeting. Angola, meanwhile, has been deepening ties with Beijing, including the Angolan president's state visit to China last month. President Lourenço also voiced his concerns over global tensions, including North Korea's provocations. The top office said the two agreed on the need for international cooperation to thoroughly implement UN Security Council resolutions in response to North Korea's ongoing nuclear and missile development and provocations. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
The United Nations watchdog on North Korea's violations of Security Council sanctions ends this Tuesday, following Russia's veto on the renewal. This has sparked concerns about the future of international efforts to restrain Pyongyang's nuclear and weapons programs. Our foreign affairs correspondent, Bae-eun-ji, explains more.
The mandate of the United Nations panel monitoring sanctions against North Korea is set to expire. Since its creation in 2009, the so-called panel of experts has played a key role in seeking to enforce UN Security Council resolutions against North Korea. The 8-member panel has produced related reports twice a year, keeping the international community informed about the regime's nuclear and missile activities. But back in March, Russia vetoed the annual renewal of the panel, effectively bringing an end to its 15 years of operation, when the mandate expires on April 30th. Now, South Korea and the international community seek new ways to monitor North Korean sanctions. Seoul's foreign ministry said Tuesday that it'll closely cooperate with like-minded countries to create a new mechanism to monitor the North.
Even though the UN Security Council expert panel's mission to monitor North Korea's sanctions will expire, the Security Council resolution against the North remains effective. The South Korean government will continue to work closely with the international community to ensure sanctions implementation.
Meanwhile, the UN sanctions monitors have concluded that a missile that landed in Ukraine earlier this year was a North Korean missile, a violation of the arms embargo on the North. Reuters reported on Monday that the panel concluded in a 32-page report to the Security Council Committee that debris recovered from a missile that landed in Kharkiv on January 2nd derived from North Korea's Hwasong-11 series missile. South Korea, the U.S., Japan, and other Western countries have accused Russia of violating UN Security Council resolutions by using North Korean missiles and ammunition in its war against Ukraine. But both Russia and the North have denied the accusations, saying they were not based on evidence. 배은지, Arirang News.
Staying with North Korea, 43 people came to South Korea from the north during the first quarter of this year. 8 of those were men and 35 were women. The Unification Ministry announced the figure on Tuesday. A senior ministry official said it's slightly lower than the 57 who defected to the south in the fourth quarter of last year, but is up from the first quarter of last year when 34 people came to the south. These days, defectors from North Korea usually come to the south via a third country, such as China, due to tightened surveillance. The total number of defectors to the south is over 34,000. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is once again visiting the Middle East amid growing hopes of a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. The U.S. is accelerating efforts to normalize relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, contingent on the ceasefire, while offering a security pact to Saudi Arabia. Shin Ha-young reports.
There is growing anticipation that a breakthrough will be reached in ceasefire negotiations between Hamas and Israel, which have been ongoing for over 5 months. After holding talks with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman during a visit to Saudi Arabia, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said that the U.S. is close to finishing a security pact with Saudi Arabia that will be offered if it normalizes ties with Israel. This is contingent on Israel and Hamas reaching a ceasefire agreement.
I think, look, the work that Saudi Arabia and the United States have been doing together in terms of our own agreements, I think is potentially very close to completion. But then, in order to move forward with normalization, 2 things will be required: calm in Gaza and a credible pathway to a Palestinian state.
The U.S. has been making efforts to improve relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Blinken was scheduled to be in Saudi Arabia and Israel in October last year for normalization talks, which did not take place due to the Hamas attack on southern Israel and the subsequent war. Saudi Arabia maintains that it cannot establish diplomatic relations with Israel without an end to its occupation of Gaza and the recognition of a Palestinian state. Meanwhile, regarding Israel's new ceasefire proposal, which outlines a 10-week ceasefire, Hamas is reportedly reviewing positively. According to a senior Hamas official speaking to AFP, after reviewing the proposal, they found no major issues and mentioned that the atmosphere is positive unless new obstacles arise from Israel. As reported by the New York Times, Israel has dropped its demand for Hamas to release 40 living hostages as part of a truce agreement and will now accept the release of 33 hostages. Blinken urged Hamas to accept what he has called an extraordinarily generous Israeli ceasefire deal, saying that Hamas has to decide quickly. Shin Ha-young, Arirang News.
In the U.S., the deadline has passed for pro-Palestinian protesters at Columbia University to leave their encampments. But despite threats of arrest and suspension, many remained in place. Protests were also seen at French universities. Yi Seung-jae has more.
2 p.m. Monday. That was the deadline given to the pro-Palestinian protesters who had set up an encampment at Columbia University in New York to protest against the dire humanitarian crisis in the Middle East and call for the university's divestment from companies with links to the Israeli occupation of Gaza. Despite threats of suspension, 80 tents and dozens of protesters remained in the encampment just after the 2 p.m. deadline. The school says only the students who remain in the encampment after the deadline would face immediate suspension and not the hundreds of other students who have encircled the camp to protect the protesters while showing their support. The Columbia protests have inspired similar pro-Palestinian demonstrations on campuses across the country, which have led to hundreds of arrests. 6 protesters were arrested at the University of Texas at Austin on Monday, with dozens of police officers and state troopers at the scene. Around 100 protesters were arrested at Boston's Northeastern University over the weekend after police in riot gear cleared an encampment at the school. Protesters at Yale University were seen setting up a new encampment Sunday afternoon after police arrested nearly 50 protesters and cleared a camp. While protesters were warned of suspension and possible arrest, no deadline to leave the encampment was set. Similar protests were also seen at universities in France, including at Sorbonne University in Paris on Monday, where police moved in on dozens of protesters who had camped out in a courtyard in the university to demand an end to Israel's bombardment of Gaza. It follows another massive protest that broke out at the Sciences Po University in Paris last week. According to an official on Monday, funding for Sciences Po would be suspended until calm and security have been restored. 이승재, Arirang News.
On the economic front, S&P Global Ratings on Tuesday kept Korea's long-term sovereign credit rating at the third highest AA rating with a stable outlook. This means the Korean economy is expected to maintain average growth rates higher than those of most high-income economies for the next 3 to 5 years, while also keeping the general government deficit low. The agency says this rating is thanks to the country's diversified, prosperous, and fast-growing economy, driven by competitive exports and increasing domestic demand. S&P's rating for Korea has remained unchanged since August 2016. Samsung Electronics is expected to log an earnings surprise in the first quarter, with its operating profits surging more than 930% compared to a year earlier. Thanks to the recovery in the memory semiconductor industry, its chip sector turned black for the first time in 5 quarters. Park Gun-woo explains.
South Korean tech giant Samsung Electronics saw a surplus in its operating profit in the first quarter for the first time in 5 quarters. According to Samsung on Tuesday, the company's operating profit in the first quarter of this year was 6.66 trillion won, which is over $4.7 billion US. That's an on-year increase of more than 931%. And that's an even larger profit than what was earned during the whole of 2023. Higher costs for DRAM and NAND flash, along with increased demand for high-value memory chips including HBM and DDR5, and strong sales of its first AI smartphone, the Galaxy S24, led to its higher-than-expected jump in profit. Revenue also rose by nearly 13% to around 71.9 trillion won, or $52.2 billion. That was also the first time in 5 quarters that sales were back above the 70 trillion won level. In detail, the Device Solution Division managing semiconductors saw an operating profit of over 1.9 trillion won, or $1.38 billion, during the first 3 months of 2023. While the division saw a yearly deficit of around 15 trillion won last year, it recorded a surplus in quarter 1 for the first time in 5 quarters. The Mobile Experience Division saw stronger sales and operating profit as well, led by the Galaxy 24 smartphone. Park Gun-woo, Arirang News.
Korea witnessed mixed economic activity in the month of March, with industrial production and facility investment losing substantial ground, but retail sales maintaining their upward trend. Our An Sung-jin has the figures.
South Korea's overall industrial output for March saw an on-month decrease for the first time in 5 months, seeing the largest drop since February 2020. Data from Statistics Korea on Tuesday show that despite an upward trend in the months previous, the figure had fallen by 2.1% on month. This is largely due to a decline in investment and a base effect of relatively high industrial production growth over the past 4 months. By sector, the mining industry decreased by 3.2%, as metal processing used to make electronic parts such as LCD panels dropped. The manufacturing industry was down by 3.5%, and service output fell by 0.8%. Facility investment also saw a large drop of nearly 7% as investments in the machinery and transport sectors dropped. However, consumption has maintained modest growth. Retail sales went up by 1.6% compared to the previous months on the back of increased sales for food and beverage as well as vehicles. There's also been a steady influx of tourists. An official from the Finance Ministry notes that though concerns may arise from the drop in production, the economy is still improving.
Despite the drop in industrial output, as seen with the GDP growth, the first quarter is seeing moderate recovery with a balanced portfolio of exports and private expenditure. This would be the fifth consecutive quarter to see an increase in overall production.
In order to maintain the trend of recovery, the government pledged to do its best to stabilize prices of agricultural products and energy products, while reinforcing investment to improve people's livelihoods. Han Sung-jin, Arirang News.
First quarter findings also show Korea's defense businesses reported substantial growth in revenue amid government efforts to boost related exports. Shin Se-byuk has the latest numbers.
Major domestic defense companies in South Korea have continued to grow in the first quarter of this year. The government has ramped up its initiative to boost the defense industry's competitiveness, with an aim to rank among the top 4 global defense powerhouses. According to a synthesis of recent market expectations by securities firms and Yonhap Infomax data, the combined first quarter revenue of the 4 leading companies was estimated at 4.4 trillion won, or $3.2 billion, marking an 18% on-year increase. These companies include Hanwha Aerospace, Korea Aerospace Industries, Hyundai Rotem, and LIG Next One. Despite the revenue growth, the overall first quarter operating profit for these companies fell nearly 19% on year to around $251 million. This decline was primarily due to a decrease in high-margin sales in Poland, where recent political shifts have led to a less favorable view of imported weapon systems. Among these, Hanwha Aerospace, South Korea's largest defense company, reported a significant revenue jump of over 9% year-on-year to around $1.5 billion, but saw a sharp decline of 42.5% in operating profit. This was due in part to the absence of new shipments of K9s and Cheonggung missile systems to Poland during the first 3 months of 2024. Kai, known for producing the KF-21 supersonic fighter and F-A-50 light attack aircraft, posted just over $570 million in revenue and around $29 million in operating profit for the January to March period, up 38% and 102.6% respectively from the previous year. This strong performance was driven by robust exports and steady domestic demand in the aviation and aerospace sectors. Similarly, Hyundai Rotem reported a 9.3% on-year growth in revenue and 40% in operating profits, led by its K2 tank. LIG Next One saw revenue gains from its exports to Indonesia, totaling around $200 million for the quarter. However, the project's low operating profit margin of 2 to 3% had minimal impact on profit improvement, resulting in a contraction of 1.8% in Q1 operating profit. Shin Se-byuk, Arirang News.
On the cultural front, American singer-songwriter Taylor Swift has become the first artist to claim all the top 14 spots on the mainstream Billboard Hot 100 chart. According to Billboard on Monday local time, all 14 tracks from her new album, The Tortured Poets Department, took the top spots on the chart, dated May 4th. With this, Swift has broken her own record of being the only artist to dominate the Hot 100's top 10 with her previous album, Midnights. The Billboard Hot 100 ranks songs every week based on streaming, radio airplay, and sales data.
Although the sky is a little disappointing with clouds across the country, it is mild in inland areas. There's rain forecast everywhere, but only in small amounts. About 5 millimeters of rain will fall on southern regions and in southern Chungcheongbuk-do province overnight. The rain will mostly subside by tomorrow morning, but there will be another shower in Jeollanam-do province tomorrow afternoon. Tomorrow, the temperature will be slightly lower than today, but similar to the spring weather found at this time of the year. It will reach 13 degrees in the morning in Seoul. As the sky gradually clears up, it will be as warm as today during the day. However, with 18 degrees in Busan and 16 in Ulsan, it will be quite cool even in the middle of the day along the east coast and in Gyeongsang-do provinces. Tomorrow morning, Daejeon and Busan will start off at 12 degrees. Daytime temperatures will top out at 23 in Seoul, Chuncheon and Daejeon 22 degrees. The early summer heat will return as the daytime temperature rises to 28 degrees Celsius in Seoul on Friday. That's all for Korea. Here are the weather conditions around the world.
Well, that brings an end to this newscast tonight. Thank you for watching. We'll be back with the latest updates tomorrow at 9 a.m. with New Day at Arirang. Good night.
하나, 둘, 셋.
Hey, Mr. Cupid, who's mine? Make sure you listen to what I say. I may be stupid or